tonight's program. This is a whole new series we're calling a Curator's Corner, where our museum curators will introduce you to some of our fabulous archival collection. Tonight's program is the virtual unveiling of four 19th century portraits that were restored with funds raised at last year's Giving Day. For those of you, who do not know what Giving Day is, it's actually Fairfield County Communities Foundation 24-hour online giving fundraising to benefit nonprofits in Fairfield County. And it's actually this year's is coming up on Thursday, and you'll hear a little more about that as well. So last year's program, last year's Giving Day, actually we raised funds to restore and reunite these four portraits, 19th century portraits. And tonight is the virtual unveiling of all the work that has been done about them. A lot of you helped us raise the funds for restoring these portraits and reuniting the family, and this is your chance to meet them. I want to take this moment to thank everyone who participated in last year's Giving Day. We truly appreciate your generosity. Our panels we have Catherine Prescott, she's our chief curator, and Catherine's broadcasting live from inside the Resig dining room, where the portraits are actually going to be on display. So Catherine's going to talk a lot about who the sitters are, the provenance, and about the restoration. And then Erica Askin is our curator of collections. So Erica is going to talk about the painter and the portraits per se. And then Joel Third is also part of our panel tonight. All of you know Joel Third. He's past president and board member, and Joel was instrumental in the acquisition of one of the portraits, as was Rhonda Hill. Rhonda, are you here? Yes, you're here. Okay, and there's Rhonda too. Okay, so I am now going to turn it over to Catherine. Catherine, please.
All right. Thank you, Hildy, and welcome everyone to our very first Curator's Corner presentation. And so I am coming to you live from the Resig dining room inside the museum. And this is where our four portraits are going to live. And hopefully we will be able to open up the museum in short order so that people can come and see these portraits as they were intended to be seen. So I'm going to start the presentation here. And so here I'm just showing you a little zoomed out picture of where the Resig dining room, where the portraits are going to live. So you can kind of see, I know on Zoom you only get a little bit of the room I'm sitting in. So we're going to start with a little bit of an introduction to who the subjects of these portraits are. And so these four portraits were done in the 1840s when these sitters were all in their about the 50s, maybe early 60s. And they're all what we call oil on board. So oil paint on a wooden board. So these are the Resig Keelers. We have first, we have Anna Keeler Resig. She is the youngest surviving daughter of Timothy and Esther Keeler, and she helped her older brother William run the Keeler Tavern after Timothy's death. And when William died rather suddenly in 1827, Anna actually inherited the tavern building, and her remaining siblings kind of gave her their shares of the tavern. And she became the sole owner of this property. And then a couple of years later, she married Abijah Resig. So in 1829, she married Abijah Resig, and they had one daughter whose name is Anna Marie, and she was born in 1830. So we have Abijah Resig, And he was a local Ridgefield boy as well. He was born here in 1791, and he was the local carriage maker. He established the first carriage manufactory in Ridgefield with Chauncey Adams, and that they started their business in 1815. And it was known locally as the Big Shop, and it was located on the corner of West Lane and Main Street, where the First Congregational Church is now. Now, the Big Shop was a very successful business. It produced high-quality light carriages that were noted for their excellent craftsmanship and their beauty. And the southern states actually became a big market for the Big Shop in the years just before the Civil War. And there was enough business down there that they actually opened up a sales office and showroom in New Orleans, Louisiana. So next we have Thaddeus Keeler Jr. He's the son of Thaddeus Keeler Sr., who was the younger brother of Timothy. So this makes Thaddeus Jr. Anna Keeler's first cousin. And Thaddeus was known about Ridgefield as Squire Thad or Quality Thad, because there were apparently several Thaddeus Keelers running about Ridgefield. So we needed to differentiate them. So Squire Thad lived in the house just to the south of Keeler Tavern, what will soon become the Fountain Inn. And he served in a number of positions in Ridgefield town government. He served as treasurer, as the town selectman. He represented Ridgefield in the General Assembly at Hartford. Thaddeus also opened Ridgefield's first law practice. And he also operated the corner store, which was on the northwest corner of the West Lane intersection. And the corner store was actually the only place in town you could get prescription medicine for much of the 19th century. And this is probably because of our final sitter, Thaddeus's wife, Betsy Perry Keeler. Betsy was the daughter of Dr. David Perry, who was one of Ridgefield's medical practitioners. So the Perry family had 3 generations of doctors, and they served as Ridgefield's doctors for over 120 years. So actually, Nehemiah, who is Betsy's sister, also operated what's called the Glenburg Mills in Georgetown, where he made different medicines and medical powders and cough syrups and stuff like that. So those were some of the things that were sold in Thaddeus's corner store. So Betsy and Thaddeus married in 1815, and they had no children. So before we move on a little bit, I wanted to show you this map of Ridgefield from 1856. I love this map. I use it whenever I can possibly get away with it. But if you look down at the southern end of the map, we have the Main Street West Lane intersection, and circled we have these 2 houses. We have A. Resig for Abijah Resig, and this is what it was formerly known as the Keeler Tavern. So this A. Resig is where I'm sitting right now. And then next door we have T. Keeler, who's Thaddeus Keeler. And then if you look across the street, right on the West Lane intersection, you see the store. So we have the store here, that would be Thaddeus Keeler's corner store. And on the opposite corner, we have the carriage shop, which is Abijah Resig's big shop there. So the Resig Keelers kind of took over this little section of Ridgefield. So how did Keeler Tavern Museum and History Center come into possession of these wonderful portraits? So Anna and Abijah's daughter, Anna Marie, sold this property to the architect Cass Gilbert in 1907. And when she sold the property, she was in her 80s. And so she actually sold the house with a lot of its furnishings still inside. And among those furnishings were the portraits of her parents, Anna and Abijah. And Kath had them hung in the house, and you can see them right here in the walls in the background. And this is what we call the Kath Gilbert dining room. It's the large extension off the back of the historic building that he added in 1910. So these portraits stayed in the house throughout the Gilbert tenure here at the Keeler Tavern property. And after Kath and his wife Julia both passed away, their daughter Emily was selling the house, and she ended up donating these portraits along with some other Keeler and Retzege papers to the Ridgefield Library history room. And then in 1990, the history room was undergoing changes, and so they returned a lot of these papers, historic papers, and objects such as these two paintings to Keeler Tavern Museum. So we were able to bring them back into our collection. Thaddeus portrait came to us rather serendipitously, actually. This portrait was purchased by a reverend. His name was James Kidd. I don't know where he was from, but it had been purchased by him at an estate auction, and he had contacted the museum in the 80s to ask for some information about this man in the portrait, about Thaddeus. And when he approached the museum, the people who were there at the time were really excited. This is a family member, and so he actually loaned us the portrait to put on display, and then a couple of years later we were able to purchase the portrait from him, and so we were able to actually accession it into our permanent collection. And then I'm going to actually ask Joel to tell us a little bit about how Betsy came to us, because this was also a rather serendipitous acquisition.
Yes, good evening, everybody, and thank you, Catherine. When you're a collector, finding something that really fits your purpose or fits some other collections you're associated with is really quite surprising and very worthwhile and quite rewarding in the collecting world. So one day we received an email from Jack Sanders, who's the local historian, and he indicated that he thinks there's one of our crowd, as he put it, is in an auction in Columbus. So we contacted the auction house on the internet to see what the catalog looked like. The internet is great for these auctions, and it's too tempting. You can actually buy things from literally all over the world. So in any case, we did, and we found this listing here, lot 522, which is oil and board of Mrs. Thaddeus Keeler. So I contacted Catherine. I says, I don't think this is one of ours because it's Kela and not Keller or Keeler. Well, it turns out if you look at the tag that's on the back of the painting up above here, you'll see that it's actually, the script is the old, well, this is the R that I learned in script, and it looks like an N. So that's how the auction house misinterpreted Keeler for down here for the Kellen. So Catherine straightened me out and said, no, this is it. This is something we should really be interested in. So I went ahead and registered for the auction, and Rhonda came over. We watched the auction down at the tavern online, and I had put in a previous bid to make sure that we got it, a pretty high bid, to make sure it didn't get away from us. And it turns out that this auction, by the way, was the Garth's auction house in Columbus, Ohio. How it got there, we have no idea. And so lo and behold, we won the painting, and we had it shipped to the museum. And as you can see on the tag, it's dated 1843. And Catherine will go into more detail on that, or actually Erica will. So it was a real surprise. We have to thank Jack Sanders for pointing it out to us, and thank the internet for being able to procure it as easily as we did. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Erica Askin, the curator of our collections, and she's going to go into a little more detail about this. So thank you very much, everybody.
So thank you, Joel. And thank you, Catherine, and thank you, Hildy. So there were portraits painted in New England as early as the 1640s, and very quickly an American portrait school arose. The American portrait school was characterized by a faithful likeness of the sitter and a respect for realism. One of the most celebrated examples of American portraiture is that of Paul Revere, painted by John Singleton Copley in 1768. Paul Revere was an accomplished silversmith before his famous midnight ride at the beginning of the American Revolution. And here, rather than posing in his Sunday best or even wearing a wig, he is wearing simple working attire, which also shows his artisan middle-class status. He's shown seated behind a table, looking straight at the viewer, holding one of his silver teapots with his tools nearby. I find it interesting that he's holding a teapot because in 1767, the British Parliament passed the Townshend Act, which placed a tax on the colonists' use of tea. And in fact, Revere signed the non-importation agreement in October of 1767. After the Revolution and into the 19th century, the growing middle class felt empowered to demand their own place within material culture. Because the middle class also hoped to take part in the culture of portraits, artists had to amend their personal style to meet the economic limitations of the middle class budget. Artists needed to reduce the level of detail, increase the speed of execution, and include itinerancy to their artistic careers. In the American Portrait School, the most important element is the faithful likeness of the sitter, who is usually depicted from the waist up. There is an overall flatness to the paintings, generalized lighting, and an absence of expressive brushwork. Artists traveled from town to town seeking work. Although many artists were well trained and skillful, sometimes the artists were anonymous as they did not sign their work. The portraits of Anna and Abijah Resig are unsigned, and the artist is unknown. The portraits, however, are stylistically consistent with the painting style of the American Portrait School. The artists faithfully painted their likeness and skillfully painted some details in their clothing, such as Anna's lacy bonnet and collar. And if you look closely, you can see that originally Anna was painted wearing wire-rimmed spectacles. They were later painted out, though sections remain so we can see that they had been there. You have to look really close. The portraits of Thaddeus and Betsy were painted by Ezra Bisbee, an artist based in New York City. Today, Bisbee is known mostly for his architectural paintings, as well as his political cartoons. On the right, here's one of his political cartoons skewering President Andrew Jackson. In 1841 and 1842, Bisbee spent time on the island of Antigua painting the colonial architecture there. On the left, this is one of his paintings, which is titled View of St. John's Cathedral. Ironically, less than a year after he left Antigua, the Caribbean was struck by a massive earthquake that destroyed or damaged all the structures on the island, including this cathedral. Though he is known today for his cartoons and architectural paintings, Ezra Bisbee described himself as a portrait painter. On the right, you can see his name and occupation listed on the passenger manifest on the ship on which he returned from Antigua in 1842. Very few of his portraits are in public collections. This portrait over here on the left of Edwin Spooner is the only other Bisbee portrait we were able to locate in the public collection, although we know that there are Bisbee portraits in private collections. In 1843, Bisbee visited Ridgefield, where he painted the portraits of Thaddeus and Betsy Keeler, whose names he inscribed on the back of the paintings, along with his signature and the date. And if you notice, both of them look almost identical in the way he presented those signatures and dates. While in town, he also painted the portraits of Mr. and Mrs. William Harley, but these portraits are in a private collection. The paintings of Thaddeus and Betsy are similar in style to the portraits of Anna and Abijah. All the paintings are oil on wood board. The paintings are skillfully painted with attention to detail in their clothing, especially the pretty collar that Betsy is wearing here, and the cuff on her dress at her wrist. And again, the background is flat and generalized, and the emphasis is on the lightness of the sitter as a faithful formal record. In comparison, however, we can see that Bisbee was a more accomplished painter in his portraits of Thaddeus and Betsy than the unknown artist who painted Anna and Abijah. But here at the Keeler Tavern History Center, we are grateful for having the faithful likeness of our important citizens of Ridgefield, who are also family and neighbors on Main Street. And so now I'm going to hand it back to Catherine, who's going to talk about the restoration of these paintings.
All right, thank you, Erica. So last year, for this Fairfield County Giving Day fundraiser, we asked for your help in getting these paintings cleaned up and restored and fit for display to the public. So here's what the portraits of Anna and Abijah looked like before the restoration. You can tell they're kind of faded and you can't really see as much detail. They're pretty dark. So these two portraits needed the most work of the set. And so we got a couple of different art conservators to come look and tell us what they thought was needed. And we ended up contracting with Yost Conservation in Oxford, Connecticut, and he did all the conservation work. So some of the issues that Tom Yost pointed out to us that he wanted to address were there were a couple of things he wanted to address. The first was we discovered that there had been two previous restorations on these paintings, and they were, let's say, rather inexpertly done. So the most recent conservation actually varnished both paintings with this really glossy acrylic varnish, and you can see that in this photo of the Abijah painting because it was very reflective and it made photographing these portraits nearly impossible because they just reflected any light you tried to put on them. There was also a second layer of varnish underneath that was a resin varnish, and that had been turning yellow just because it was old, and that's something that happens to resin varnishes, is they yellow, and it was obscuring a lot of the details of these portraits, especially the background. And because these are oil on board portraits, wood does crack as it ages because it dries out and then it gets wet and then dries out again. And so old cracks had been filled, and then those fillings had been painted over to try and blend them in, but it wasn't done very well. It was using a broad brush stroke. So if you see on this photograph of Anna, is you can see these kind of vertical lines here. I'm kind of circling them. Those are the overpaint that was trying to blend in the filled cracks on the board. And so these are a couple of the things that that we wanted to get addressed in the restoration. So here's some close-ups. This is mid-restoration, so the old varnish has been taken off. Some of that overpaint has been removed as well, so we can see the board underneath, and loose paint that had been chipping and things like that has also been removed. So you do notice it here in this mid-restoration photo. And you can see also on Abijah's short front, there's a bunch of these little brown dots, which is just a little bit of staining from dust and small insects that may have landed on the painting over the years. So these are some of the things that were addressed in the restoration. And here we have those cracks, those filled cracks with that really broad overpainting. So the old paint has been removed, and Tom is now about to go in and fill these cracks and blend them in so you can't tell that they were ever there. So here we have Anna before and after. So after all the little in painting and was completed, Tom revarnished these with a synthetic resin varnish that was a matte. So we are not going to have that glossy varnish reflection problem anymore. And you can see he was able to really bring back out the background. You can see some of the few details that there are in the background, as well as all the details of Anna's portrait itself. And here we have Abijah as well. So you can see he looks much cleaner, and hopefully he'll be much happier like this. So Thaddeus and Betsy didn't need restoration work per se. They had both been previously restored, we believe sometime in the 60s or 70s possibly, but they did need to be reframed. So Betsy came to us without a frame at all, and Thaddeus had this very heavy frame that looks a little bit worn, and he didn't actually sit well in the frame. So it was a little bit loose, and we wanted to address that as well. And we wanted to make sure that they had period appropriate matching frames. They are a set, so we wanted them to match. And so we went to Sean Kilroy over at the Ridgefield Frame Shop, and he helped us choose these two lovely frames here, and he did the framing for us. And so here we have Betsy and Thaddeus in their new frames. So here they are before they were, all the work was done, and it is thanks to you guys and all of our supporters who were able to help us get this done. And now our 4 portraits are back home in the Resig dining room, waiting for visitors to the museum to be able to see them. So we did want to give a shout out to everybody who donated to this project. And Giving Day is an annual fundraising event, and we use this as a great opportunity to highlight pieces from our collection and get some conservation and restoration work done. And so since we have restored these lovely portraits, we thought, well, now is a great time to really dive in and see who these people are. And we decided we're going to start with Abijah Resig and kind of figure out who he is. So one thing we do know about Abijah is that he was a Mason. Actually, at the time of his death, he was the oldest Mason in the country. And in our collection, we have this Masonic apron, which we believe it might be Abijah's. We're not quite sure. But we have this Masonic apron that needs a little bit of care. And so this Thursday, all day, is the 2021 Fairfield County Giving Day, and we are hoping to raise $4,000 to get this apron properly conserved and purchase an appropriate display case so that we can also showcase this apron as part of an interpretation about who the man that was Abijah Resig is. So we hope that you will be able to support us in this endeavor as well. So I'm going to stop sharing that. And if you have any questions, that's the end of our presentation here. But if you have any questions, we're happy to answer. So you can type your questions into the chat box.
Yeah, drop your questions in the chat box and we can, we'll give everybody a few minutes. I know it takes a few minutes to sort of type it. Anything about the restoration or the provenance or the family or where they're going to be or anything that might interest you, or the Masonic apron, you know, that's another project. And it's been really wonderful over the years. We have started doing Fairfield County Giving Day. It's the Fairfield County Community Foundation that puts up the funding, and it gets matched by Bank of America. And it's really just for nonprofits within Fairfield County. And initially, when we started doing this in 2014, I think was the first time, we were like one of a handful, and today it's like hundreds of nonprofits. So, and early on, we decided that this was a great way really to restore items from our collections, because as a museum, we have a wonderful collection. Hopefully soon we'll be able to also show you our new collection archival storage room over in the visitor center. It's on the lower level, someone's phone. And yeah, so it's just, these portraits are great. Here we have some questions. Miriam, how will the apron be restored? Any idea of what will be done? Yeah, Catherine, you can answer that.
Yeah, so we do know a couple of areas that need work. Let me bring up the picture again so you can kind of see it. So this apron is silk ribbon that's been appliqued on a cotton base. And most of the work that needs to be done is really cleaning of this. It's just been sitting in a box, and before it came to us, we're not quite sure how it's been stored. So there's some stains on it that need to be taken care of, especially some rust stains, and those can really cause problems if they're left to kind of set in. So that needs to be taken care of. And then you can see right down the center, I think early, before it came to us, it was stored folded in half. And so there's this crease right in the center, which has actually caused cracking in the ribbon. And so the conservators will make sure that those cracks in the silk ribbon don't continue to fray until the ribbon is just little silk threads. And then the last thing that also really needs to be done is this. You can see the all-seeing eye that's on the top. That's painted onto the apron, and that is also, the paint is flaking a little bit. So we want that to be adhered back down, so we don't lose any of the paint and lose that lovely image there. So that's pretty much most of what needs to be done. I think the biggest thing is definitely the cleaning, and then we want to be able to, we'll mount it into a plexiglass display case so that it'll be able to be showcased.
And all the work is being done, like all our textile restoration has always been done by the Textile Conservatory Workshop over in South Salem. So they are a world-class textile conservation workshop, and they have fabulous, I mean, just going there is a treat, right? Erica, Catherine, and Joel, you've all been there. Karen Karen McChesney has been there when we restored Julia Gilbert's fabulous, gown. So it's a treat. It's a wonderful space. Catherine, I have a couple more questions here. Okay, so one is from Paula. What is the date on the Resig paintings? Erica.
Erica can answer that.
The date on the Resig paintings are unsigned and undated. However, we believe by the appearance of Abijah and Anna that they were done in the 1840s. The portraits of Thaddeus and Betsy were signed and dated and titled on the back by Ezra Bisbee. But we believe that by style that Anna and Abijah were done in the 1840s.
And I think hopefully that also answered, Wendy, your question. Is there any evidence of his signature on any of the 4 paintings? So Erica just spoke to that, right?
Yeah, so there's no signature on the front of any of the paintings, but as Erica has said, Bisbee did sign the back of the 2 Keeler portraits.
And also, I might add that this is characteristic of Ezra Bisbee, that he signed and dated and titled his portraits that we know of the few that we know of, on the back.
And typically, maybe Erica, you can speak a little bit to the fact that, Ezra Bisbee is a great example of an itinerant painter, portraitist. So they would actually travel, and he might have stayed at the Resig Hotel, right? And so, Erica, do you want to say a little something about that?
So that it's interesting that he was next door to Anna and Abijah, but he painted Betsy and Thaddeus, and then he went down the street and painted the Hollies in the same year, 1843. So we know at least of 2 people in the town that while he was there, he painted. And he was based in New York City, in Brooklyn. And he also, we know that I found that there's a charcoal portrait of a woman at the Long Island Historical Society that he signed and dated. And then the portrait of Schooner, I think was done in 1842, he signed and painted. So he basically traveled around, and this was typical of the artists at this time. In order to get work, they really had to move around. Not everybody was going to travel to Brooklyn or New York to get their portrait done.
And can one of you, maybe Catherine or Erica, say something to, there's this saying, it costs an arm and a leg, and that has to do with, the way portraits were painted in terms of the sitters, how much they could afford in addition to the head.
Catherine, do you want to?
I think you know more about that than I do.
So if you notice that the portrait that we saw, I don't know if you can bring it back up, Catherine, of Schooner at all?
Yeah, give me a second. All right, here we go.
So he's holding a newspaper in his hand. You see his hands, and he's gazing out at the viewer, and it's the Long Island. I forget the other part of it, but it's the newspaper he's the editor of, the Long Island
Star.
Star, exactly. And we also know that this is in the collection of the Long Island Historical Society. So he made, because he wanted to be sure everybody knew he was the editor, he probably paid a little bit more to have this added to his portrait. So again, the more detail there is, the more it's going to cost, basically, because these itinerary artists needed to work fast. They couldn't, spend months, at the Keeler Tavern, painting a portrait, but they needed to be expedient, and so that's basically how the middle class were able to have their portraits done.
Thanks, Erica. Are there any more questions? Okay. Well, if not, thank you again for attending our first Curator Corner. So again, as long as we're not able to bring, you inside, we thought this is a great way to share our collections, and even once we open up as well, because how nice is it to sit at home and, have a nice presentation with one of our curators and learn about some of the the artifacts and the items that, are part of our museum collection. So we'll continue doing these, absolutely. And I would just like to remind you again, on Thursday, this coming Thursday, it's 24 hours, and we're not going to be the only one in town, as you all know. Your inbox is already being, clogged with a lot of these emails. But if you could support us again, we would be very, very grateful, as always. And we have about 4 or 5 e-blasts or emails planned for the 25th. And every time we want to give you a little bit more about it, it should be fun and entertaining. So hopefully you learn something, and eventually, you'll click on donate. And we're trying to raise these $4,000. So thank you in advance for your support. That would be great. And it was really nice seeing you all tonight. And thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Erica. Thank you, Joel, and Rhonda too. Thank you again also for your support in making, reuniting the family, right? That's all about reuniting the family. So great. Okay. Well, thank you all very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks. Good night.